Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to join the Responsible Communication Ethics First activities. These activities are brought to you by Global Alliance for Public Relations and Communication Management. Global Alliance is a confederation of major PR associations worldwide, representing over 360,000 professionals and dedicated to enhancing the role of public relations globally. My name is Kia Haring. I'm a board member in Global Alliance, and I'm responsible for this Ethics Month and related activities. And the purpose of this Ethics Month is really to strengthen the ethical judgment, accountability, and trust building in modern communication practice by helping us as professionals to navigate the complexity, power, and emerging risks together. So our activities during this month include 2 webinars. We are just about to start the first one about PR societal mandate. And the next one is towards the end of the month. So on Tuesday, 24th of February, please feel welcome to join to discuss communication for future-proof leadership with the colleagues on that occasion. But I'm taking you forward now to our agenda today and welcoming our great speakers for PR societal mandate, ethics, law, and moral reasoning across different regions. As a first speaker here, we have Chiara Valentini, PhD, a professor and head of corporate communication discipline from Jyväskylä University in Finland. Chiara is also engaged in the university in Milan, Italy, but representing Europe and European view for us here today. I also want to welcome Marlene Neal, PhD and professor and graduate program director at Baylor University, USA. And the third great speaker, PhD Flora Hang Beseker, a senior lecturer at University of Technology from Sydney, Australia. So 3 continents presented on our session here today. And a reminder to all of you online, so you are free to put forward your questions in the chat, and we'll spare time for them at the end of this session. So we start by Chiara going through the ethical onion and the research she has done related to that, following directly by Marlene, and finally Flora from the Australian perspective will talk about ethics in public relations and beyond legality. But without further ado, let's move on, and over to you, Chiara.
Thank you, Kia, for the nice presentation introduction. And hello, everyone from all across the world. We are very happy to have you here in this webinar on a topic which I think we all care about, and that is very, really timely and really important given what we see around the world and what is happening. So my presentation starts really from some very basic things, that is what is happening in our context and situation. And I'm sure that many of you have already checked or have seen at least some information from Edelman Barometer report, the last one. There was this concept that kind of stood my attention, this insularity, or this increasing distrust or generalized trust or let's say skepticism towards different things happening in society, different values, diversity in general. And I started thinking about whether these questions, or why are we not trusting each other or trusting our neighbor or our organization, is also something fundamentally linked with how we practice ethics, how we behave ethically, how we understand ethics that might be very different. And of course, not to enter into conversation, discussion about greenwashing or let's say claim that, about innovation or political position, political advocacy of certain organization. We see there is a lot of discussion these days about the position organizations in different social political matters. Now, what I thought about is that obviously we talked about ethics for ages. I think everybody thinking about our profession, we have been trained and we are trying to promote ethical behaviors all along. We try to promote professional mindset. We try to promote with our clients, with our students, the importance, obviously, to follow the rule of laws and so forth. But I think we are in a very critical point. And I visualize a volcano in eruption exactly to see how I see the situation right now. This volcano is erupting and is calling for more social impact, for more responsibility to speak up on different things, but also to do things even without speaking up. And that's where I want to add it there. Now, what I would like also to share with you, Kia mentioned the research. Of course, we all, the three of us here today are all researchers, so we do a lot of different things in our institutions. But this is something that is a recent work which actually didn't do only by myself. There is another author, Katie Place of Winnipeg University, has worked with me in this ethics onion. We have been asked to contribute in a new volume by Ralph Tench, Stephen Reddington on exploring public relation management communication, which will come up this year on the ethics. And we start asking ourselves, how can we prepare our students, our professionals on rethinking ethics or thinking ethics in a more complex way? And when we started digging into this concept, we see the complexity that is not only about ethical standard, there is a lot of different things that need to be taken into the equation, they need to be balanced, they need to be ponderated. And here, okay, it looks a little bit more like an egg than an onion, but our idea of the onion was to try to depict the ethics as a complex element made of different layers with the legality, so the legal framework, the respect of rule of laws as a central core element of the profession. Of course, if you don't do things legally, then you are not really into the profession, I would say. Moving out to the ethics and then to morality, which is an additional element we think that sometimes we forget, but it's very important to discuss with. And the part also where we think there is much more subjectivity. So more challenges, because obviously we don't have really principle for morality. We might have some principle for morality, but it's very questionable, it's very subjective and value-based element. So we start working on this ethics onion to just show the complexity of the professional landscape that we need to address in contemporary situation. Now, I want to share with you some elements, not again to go too much in detail this and to have sufficient time also for my colleagues to present and also for a discussion. But when we start, for example, to look into and zoom in a certain way to legality, we start thinking about also the complexity for today organization operating in multiple countries, multiple regions, because obviously following the rule of laws might change from a different region to another. Just give you an example. Collecting personal data on online digital behaviors on consumer or people who navigate different sites is completely illegal in Europe. It's against the GDPR. You go against the law here. But in some part of the world, you can still do it, and that's totally okay from a legal point of view. So having this kind of reflections of what so I'm supposed to do in different contexts might bring you to a specific understanding of ethics, which might not be sufficient, I would claim, to meet the expectations of our stakeholders. Obviously, from a legal point of view, there are also a lot of challenges internally because when you operate in an environment or during a critical situation, we typically have our legal department knocking and say, please don't go out, don't talk to the press until we figure out there will be legal implications if you slow and admit kind of responsibility. We do have also these to balance, knowing that our stakeholders, our meetings expect responses, expect transparency, expect some commitment to the truth in a certain way. The next level, that is the ethics. Of course, we have seen that in principle, our code of ethics are a good starting point, but they are not sufficient in that, because often the reality shows that there is a situational ethics, situations that makes us to follow certain principle in a certain way, or let's say declining or transposing some principle in different manner. We also know that our stakeholders might have a very different ethical awareness, and therefore their expectation towards ethical behavior are different. This can be obviously inside organization, but also externally. We see that the reality shows that ethics requires ongoing reflection and questioning within your team, within the different unit, within your stakeholder in different contexts. So it's much more complex, and there are much more factors that we need to take into consideration than just simply say, okay, here are our code, please follow the codes and you will be fine. Last but not least, I would say the most stricter and most challenging part is the morality, the out layer, the onion. There is no really a bulletproof kind of way of addressing this question, but we see that sometimes even following the rule of laws, even try to follow the code of ethics, we still not fulfill all the expectation of a stakeholder. We see a situation where there are some, if not discrimination, but there's some kind of marginalizations of issues, despite being ethical, despite being legal. And here I would say, beside emotional intelligence and having a strong professional identity, the really importance here is the cultural understanding, recognizing that diverse moral perspective across culture bring different priority. And sometimes what is the right course of action from a moral point of view might not be the more rational decision making in that position. So it's very complex and very difficult in these times to navigate the different risks and situation there. We have collected obviously also some data from our side of the region, and there is a lot of discussions also these days about some important questions that we see from sustainability, environmental issues, to questions of diversity, inclusion, to questions of stability, many different things we have been collected. But I would like to share with you these slides and the next slides, two quotes which for me stand a lot about this dynamics of a leader who embed ethical thinking in a critical manner, recognize the complexity of today's environment, and also understand the importance of leading by example with to provide this social impact, a positive social impact. Now, this quote comes from a head of external communication, marketing communication, and what this quote underlines is the importance of acknowledging mistakes and be accountable for the mistakes, and not be afraid to say, hey, I did this wrong, but look, now I'm trying to fix it. Because exactly this kind of example, coming especially from a leadership position, give the strong indication. I would say give a sense of humanity also these people. I mean, we are not really robots, we make mistakes. But if we acknowledge, we recognize, and we are helping in a very authentic manner to fix them, we are able to build trust. And this professional mention as well, that I put it in bold, ethical practice isn't only about doing things right. It's also about responsibly addressing the moment we don't do things right, which I think is very important today. And this one is about also the importance of building these cultures in your team, in your group, in your environment. Because it's a fundamental element for building. It's not only one person. Ethics is not only about one person, one professional. It's a group work. It's the different pieces, like in a puzzle, that bring together this culture of ethical behavior. And in fact, this quote from managing director of a consulting agency is about this. It says, a culture of ethical behavior doesn't emerge by accident. It's built over time. There is no quick formula for creating this. It's a long-term commitment based on consistently respecting others, modeling integrity, showing in every interaction what ethical behavior look like in practice. And people learn what is acceptable by examples we set. I think these are very strong examples from the Nordic region, from how leaders in the region are thinking about today environment and what it means to overcome this insularity, this lack of trust on that. Now, to conclude my presentation, and I would like perhaps to underline three main takeaways. I think something that we've seen very important, and we see that need to be even overemphasizing today. And I say this not just for the so-called multinational global company, because today, even if you are a startup, you are not isolated in one community. Everything you do is visible around the world. So this kind of awareness is applicable, it's important globally. So I would say cultural awareness. So obviously have a sense of what are the principles you want to follow that aligns with your organization, with your community, but also try to think about how this need to be adapted to the context and the region. And this obviously is possible if you have in place a regional ethical radar where you can monitor the stakeholder expectation. Next, having by default this human dignity. So start thinking about your ethical practice always in the most, in mind, the most strict context, and that will set you in the right position, and the aftercare matters. And finally, this personal morality. Ask yourself, how would you show yourself as a persona if the things you are communicating, you are preaching, you are telling to your team will not stand the front page, of, for example, of the media tomorrow. And with this, I will stop here. And of course, I will be happy to take questions later on. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Chiara. And as said, please put your questions to the chat, and we have time for them at the end. But let's move forward to Marlene and your part, putting ethics into practice. Please go ahead.
Thank you for the reminder. I'm going to be talking about set the tone. We were talking a lot about ethics, about legal, and how the different dynamics work together to help us make decisions as communicators. And so I want to refer back to a classic work by Baker that talks about some of the justifications that we use in communication. At the very lowest level is that just communicators are just focused on their own self-interest, looking out for number one. A step up from that would be entitlement, where there's a focus on rights rather than on responsibilities. Professional persuaders have a right to advocate for legal products and causes, even if they are harmful, is kind of the mindset behind this perspective. And also, if it's legal, it's considered ethical. An improvement from that would be enlightened self-interest, where you have the attitude that businesses do well financially by doing good ethically, and that ethical behavior makes good business sense, and that ethical behavior will prevent government regulations. Of course, people do approach ethical decision making and communication decision making from that perspective as well. Then you have enlightened self-interest, where you're thinking about businesses do well. And that's what I was just referring to, the fact that ethical behavior will then prevent government regulation. And then social responsibility is a perspective that corporate citizens have a responsibility to the societies in which they operate and for which they will profit, believing that they have obligations of good citizenship and combining positivity to the social, political environment and environmental health of society. And so that would be, of course, the perspective that a lot of organizations should have, is thinking about how businesses can give back to their communities. And then the highest level, which is kind of more of an ideal state, has to do with the perspective that individuals treat others as they would wish to be treated and as others wish to be treated, and that they pursue the moral ideal with dignity and integrity despite the behaviors of those around them. And also taking the perspective that they should promote and create the kind of world and society in which we all would like to live. And so those are some of the different perspectives and ways that we can approach decision making. So I wanted to discuss from that perspective some of the examples that have happened in the past that people have called out, that organizations have taken, where they come at it from more of that entitlement perspective. And the first example had to do with an agency that helped President Putin place an op-ed in the New York Times that many felt like was just a piece of propaganda. There's also a very extreme example with Bell Pottinger that used tactics such as fake Twitter accounts at the time, the use of bot software to create automated Twitter posts, and a disinformation campaign in order to incite racial tensions in South Africa. And some more examples have included using AI to prepare apology statements. And as people discover that, they feel like the organizations lack sincerity. Or we've also heard about companies who have been using virtual models rather than hiring diverse models for communication campaigns. And then there was an example a few years ago where Sports Illustrated, they ran a paid content. Uh, some paid content, some sponsored content that you had some fake product reviewers where they had used stock photos and they had some fake profiles that appeared to be journalists were not, but were not actual people. And so while some of these practices might be legal, we all do question their judgment with some of these examples that I've shared. So I did some research a few years ago that I actually had a list of different items and asked which of these ethical dilemmas that they had faced. And these were some of the more common issues that public relations practitioners indicated that they had faced or their colleagues. So, number one had to do with conflict of interest, then transparency. Other wording that had been used around that had to do with disclosure, selective truth telling, confidentiality, verifying facts and information, and no consequences for ethical behavior. And you can even see there's a lack of ethics training that is also a concern. Now, I want to point out that when it comes to making ethical decisions, there are some factors that we typically consider when deciding whether or not it's worth raising a concern to those more senior than ourselves. And so, number one would be the magnitude of the consequences, which has to do with the number of people that would be impacted by the decision. Also, the social consensus that the action is good or bad. So whether or not we think the people around us would agree or disagree with that particular decision. And then the probability of the effect, both the likelihood that the act in question will take place and that harm or benefit will occur. Time and urgency. So time pressure matters when we feel like the decision is imminent. We're more likely to speak up than when we have some time to reflect and think about it. And then proximity, how near we feel to the people who are going to be impacted by the decision. So obviously, we're going to care more about decisions that are going to impact people that we are close to. And a good example of this is a colleague of mine within PRSA, the Public Relations Society of America, Paula Padine. She was a veteran. And whenever she had an issue within the US VA hospital system, and they knew that the decisions that were being made by people in their organization was impacting the health and wellness of veterans in the organization. As a veteran herself, she felt very compelled to speak up and address this issue, and so did her colleagues. And that's why several of them ended up serving as whistleblowers in that situation. And that's what exposed a wait time scandal where they revealed to both the media and to government regulators that veterans were not getting quality health care in a timely fashion. And then the concentration of the effect, the number of people affected by the decision. And so when more of these factors are present, we're going to be more willing to speak up over some. And I've got a great quote about this from a study I did several years ago. Someone said in public relations, they said, you have to pick your battles carefully over some minor thing. You don't want to fall on your sword, but the major ethical things, you just literally have to take a stand and draw a line in the sand. Like I said, you have to be prepared to walk out. And so you'll see this situation, this distinction over some minor thing. People may not want to take a stand, but when it comes to major ethical issues, that's when they're more willing to speak up and express their concerns about the issue. Now, I wanted to talk about a little bit of the framework that I use for my research has to do with behavioral ethics. And so there was a framework built by Rest that actually shows the different processes that we work through when making an ethical decision. So we begin with moral awareness, and so that's where some training is helpful for people to become aware of what the ethical standards are for the profession and to really think about and be able to identify an ethical issue when it is presented before them. Then you have more ethical decision making where we might use some different frameworks, work through some different steps to think through what is the right thing to do in this situation. But then the following steps that oftentimes people don't reach are actually moral intent, expecting to actually do something about it, and then moral action or behavior. And so many times people don't move from a moral awareness to actually acting on their values. And so Hauser specifically talked about this knowledge practice gap, that a lot of times ethical training does not necessarily impact behavior. And so I've been a big fan of this behavioral ethics approach, which develops a sense of moral efficacy or confidence in our abilities by having people practice and work through scenarios, developing scripts or plans on how they would respond when the actual issue does present itself. And so it presents them with options to act responsibly in ethical dilemma situations, strengthening their judgment and intent on an intuitive level. And that will then more likely result in ethical behavior when you actually confront an issue. So, Gentile, who is behind some resources I'm going to share with you in a moment, she pointed out that some of the most significant barriers to acting on ethical concerns would be beliefs that the effort would be futile, fears of retaliation, and personal risk for their careers. And Hauser wrote that even when professionals know what is right, they often feel that they do not have the option to behave responsibly without, for instance, offending their business partners and losing the deal. And so you do have these different barriers. In fact, I have some research in progress right now. I did a national survey with 257 US employees working in communication firms. And when I asked if they had ever chosen to remain silent regarding an ethical issue in their organization, 36, almost 37% reported yes, that they had remained silent. And also, I asked if they'd faced any consequences for after actually providing ethics counsel. And roughly 32% reported that yes, they had faced consequences. And those consequences included being treated harshly by their colleagues, loss of influence, pay cuts, loss of their job. They either quit or resigned or were demoted. So these are some helpful resources I'd like to point you to. Ethics Unwrapped has a lot of different videos that talk about some of the rationalizations that you will encounter that would justify unethical behavior and then how to overcome those. And then there's the Giving Voice to Values curriculum that has a lot of different case studies that you can work through. And then also there's some free training modules through the Arthur W. Page Center. With the Giving Voice to Values curriculum, they encourage us to engage in role play by rehearsing scripts and developing action plans that then prepares you for when you do actually do face an ethical dilemma, knowing how to respond. And so, with the Giving Voice to Values process, they definitely encourage you to develop an action plan so you know exactly how you would respond when you do face an ethical issue. You begin by identifying the reasons or rationalizations that could prevent you, as well as those around you, from acting ethically. You also think through who are the stakeholders and what is at stake for each of them. And then how could you actually give voice to your values and exercise moral imagination? What should you do? And what are your most powerful and persuasive arguments? And then what kind of influence tactics can you use? Because a lot of times you can't just speak out to someone and say you're being unethical. You have to think about how you're going to approach them, especially when you're speaking truth to power. And so I did some research several years ago with senior leaders and asked what kind of approaches that they had used to raise ethical concerns. And so rational approaches were very popular. That involves using case studies, research to back up your recommendations, facts and figures that support your position, and the legitimacy appeals, which have to do with what is right, lawful, and consistent with the organization's core values. You also can use relational approaches where you recruit allies or coalition members and you raise the issue together. And then there's also the approach of asking questions and engaging in dialogue where you can hear where the other person is coming from that helps you then determine how to convince them of the right action. And then other approaches that have been used in the past is citing personal experiences. Especially this works well for senior leaders who have a lot of different examples that they can draw from their careers. Pressure, which has to do with being persistent and assertive. And emotional appeals. With this particular approach, I found that they didn't so much approach it from their own emotions, but the emotions of stakeholders. And then raising the concerns from the perspective of key stakeholders, or sometimes that's been referred to as the devil's advocate, saying other people might look at this and think. The direct approach is just like it sounds, where you're just very straightforward with someone about the issue at hand. You also can use scenarios, offer alternatives or solutions. The headline test, which has them think about the media consequences of a decision, or you could also use in some organizations internal anonymous reporting systems, but you do want to make sure that those are safe to use. So I will wrap up with that portion of the presentation, and I look forward to welcoming some of your questions later.
Thank you, Marlene. And as said, we'll take the questions a bit later, but welcome Flora, Ethics in Public Relations and Beyond Legality. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everyone. It is really my pleasure to join this webinar. And so for me, as you can see that from Australia, right now it is summertime. And I just hope that from some of the observations and then the case study, I can share with you some of the Australian perspective when we discuss ethics. And in my sharing today, I will begin by discussing what legality means in public relations practice in Australia, followed by a case study showing why legality is not enough. And then I will introduce an alternative ethical approach that highlights the need to focus on human beings when discussing ethics. And my focus today will be more from the organizational level in discussing ethics for public relations and communication. Okay, and oh, I'm sorry. Did I? Oh, sorry. Okay, so from here, so what does legality mean in Australian public relations practice? In Australia, legality in like in public relations practice refer to following a range of legal and regulatory framework that govern communication. So this will include like consumer protection against misleading or deceptive conduct, privacy defamation law, anti-discrimination provisions, and various advertising and political communication rules. And legality, answer a very specific question. Is this communication allowed under this kind of law? So from this perspective, it does not really consider whether the communication is fair, responsible, culturally sensitive, or aligned with professional values. And this distinction is essential for understanding why legal compliance alone cannot really guide ethical decision making. So where are the tensions coming from? All right, it's kind of, okay. And then, so practitioners, they will encounter like ethical tensions where legal meanings diverging from lived experience. A message can comply with the law, yet marginalize vulnerable groups, suppress legitimate dissent, or privilege dominant voice. So in diverse societies like here in Australia, ethical challenges always emerge around like silence as much as speech. So choosing not to communicate may be legally safer, but ethically problematic when stakeholders expect acknowledgement or explanations or accountability. So here, I would like to share with you a case from Australia that will illustrate legality is not sufficient when policy involves vulnerable citizens. So let me quickly, sorry. I'm sorry, something's wrong here from my end. Okay, so let me quickly explain what this RoboDebt scheme means here in Australia. So this RoboDebt was an automatic welfare debt recovery scheme that used in Australia from 2015 to 2019. And that matched tax office income data with welfare records that issue automatic debt notices when they found discrepancies. And because it relied on income averaging, so many debts were incorrectly calculated, especially for people with irregular work. Because in Australia, there are a large group of taxpayers who are casual workers. So then for them, they have to prove that they did not owe the government money. So in 2019, finally, the federal court ruled that, okay, this scheme was unlawful. And there is also a report in 2023 by Royal Commission. They described this scheme as crude and cruel. So, however, the government still communicate in the way that they defend for this scheme as lawful, and then even while they significantly, no, this kind of scheme actually has significantly brought harm to a lot of taxpayers. Okay, so here I would also like to share with you how communication was done from the government side. So after the scheme was introduced, and the government would consistently frame like this scheme was lawful, efficient, and then also necessary to protect taxpayers' funds. And officials highlighted automation and physical responsibility, and then they position welfare recipient as potential non-compliers rather than citizens deserving care. So this kind of framing create significant public interest concern. By 2000, from 2016 to 2017, advocates, legal centers, academics, journalists, they have already raised a lot of issues about this kind of income averaging and incorrect debt calculation and the physical or psychological harm brought to the some of the taxpayers. However, the government officials' responses treated this like a minor operational issues rather than really ethical or system failures. So communication, therefore, helped legitimize a harmful system instead of supporting public debate. So the interests of those vulnerable taxpayers, those casual workers, they were subordinated to defending policy credibility. And so for public relations from this ethical standpoint, and this demonstrates that public interest is not abstract. When communication protects institutional reputation at the expense of foreseeable harm, ethical responsibility is compromised long before legality is being questioned. So why is that for this scheme that ethical principles are at stake? So Robodebt, reveal key ethical concerns around like honesty, transparency, accountability, and professional independence. So many official messages, they are technically accurate, from the legal standpoint, but they can still be misleading, especially regarding how they calculate income averaging and then the burden placed on individuals. And the communication really relies just only on legalistic language that obscured how deaths were calculated. So when harm emerged, officials, government officials, they would defer to legality rather than acknowledging responsibility. And communicators were constrained by political authority, limiting their ability to question harmful framing. So this case shows that ethical practices require recognizing harm, challenging misleading narratives, and maintaining professional judgment, even when messages comply with law. So from this case, I would like to introduce another perspective when we discuss ethics. This is a so-called corporeal ethics. And this ethics has been extensively discussed by two very famous management scholars in Australia, Poland and Rose. For them, when they discuss this kind of corporeal ethics, they think that it is a way of thinking about ethics that starts not with rules, laws, or abstract principles. Rather, it is about what actually happened to people. So in a sense, it asks a very simple question. What does this decision do to human beings in their everyday lives? So instead of treating people as like data points, cases, audiences, corporeal ethics bring attention back to lived experiences, how the decision caused fear, stress, confusion, shame, exhaustion, and vulnerability. And these are not emotional side effects. They are, when people have this kind of feeling, when they have this kind of response, then that can cause ethical signals. So this perspective is particularly useful in large organizations and government sectors because, like decision making is often distant from those who are affected. So corporeal ethics challenge that distance. So it says that if your system or communication routinely cause harm to people's bodies or lives, then something ethical has already gone wrong. All right. So the next I would discuss is, okay. So why this kind of ethical approach is also relevant to public relations. So this corporeal ethics matters because communication shapes how harm is felt. Messages can intimidate or can confuse or reassure, and these emotional and physical reactions are ethical signals, like what I mentioned earlier. So ethical communication is therefore not just only about accuracy or compliance, but also recognizing people as human beings, that they are not the administrative problems. So being silent can also carry ethical weight. So corporeal ethics will encourage practitioners to pay attention to how communication affects real lives and to think about whether their work recognizes impact or unintentionally adds to suffering. So then if I use this corporeal ethics to analyze the Robodex case, so from this approach, Robodex failure become very clear because it caused widespread anxiety, confusion, and shame. And then these harms were predictable. However, as I mentioned earlier, official communication, they've only focused on legality. They consider there is nothing wrong from the legal perspective. And then they ignore the impact brought to human beings. So people were told that the system was lawful and that they could appeal if they don't like. However, even in this kind of process, when many of the taxpayers, when they receive the letters from the government, that still brings anxiety and financial stress for them to deal with the mistakes coming from this kind of calculation. So corporeal ethics highlights that ethical failure occurred long before courts acted. The bodies or experiences or affected people showed harm earlier than when the legal procedures can step in. All right, and then if I link this case to explain why legality is not enough, because that this case shows simple but uncomfortable truth, like legal approval does not guarantee ethical legitimacy. So for those years that the government defended the scheme was lawful, it was correct, and they rely on legal advice, legislation, or formal processes as justification. But law only sets very minimum standard. So it moves slowly and focuses on technical compliance. But while ethics will ask broader questions, like if we want to discuss ethics, we would ask, okay, who is harmed? Who is affected? Is this harm acceptable? And who carries the risk and who should be accountable? So in this case, people were already experiencing fear, confusion, financial stress long before courts stepped in. And because it was still considered lawful, ethical concerns were sort of sidelined. So that is why relying on legality alone is risky. Then by the time the law responds, the ethical damage has already been done. All right, so finally, this just want to mention a little bit of conclusion. So from this sharing, we know that from this case, it is not just, Robodebt wasn't ethically problematic because it was later ruled illegal. It was ruled illegal because ethical problems were already there. So the harm was visible well before the law responded. So for us communication professionals, so this reminds us that legality doesn't settle ethical questions. Legality is only sets minimum standards. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Flora, and a big thanks to all of our speakers. I hope you enjoyed the presentation so far. I at least have picked one important thing from each and every one. To me, I mean, when Chiara talked about the personal morality, and if you would end up in the front page news, would you be able to defend your story there, was something that made me really think. From Marlene, I pick the techniques to address the ethical concerns. So there are techniques that we communicators should take use of. And Flora, your view to the corporeal ethics, what happens to people and what are the lived experiences, resonated extremely well. Now it's time for the Q&A, and so far there's not many questions, maybe a reflection to the one that we had, that we need to agree with the speakers here. People are asking if the presentation will be available, but at least the recording of this webinar will be available, so you can revisit it there. Let's continue with you, Flora. I have a question from you. So, regarding this RoboDebt case, what early signs of harm do you think a communication professional should have regarded as an ethical warning signal, even when something is said to be legal and approved? Please put the mic on. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for asking this question. When I was preparing for today's presentation, I was also thinking about this, like apparently, because in Australia, a lot of times people talk about so-called public communication because they pay a lot of attention on how the government communicate with the society. And so I asked myself, if today I work for the government, and then when I see this kind of scheme has caused, of course, like when this scheme was introduced, because that really relied a lot on algorithm. And then apparently the design of algorithm, probably there were some mistakes. And then, so I think that in the very beginning, probably nobody will foresee the kind of anxiety or financial stress brought to some taxpayers. But I think that from public relations person's standpoint, I am the one that I always believe in environmental scanning. Whatever an organization is doing, we need to constantly monitor the reactions from the public. And then not just only like, helping organizations, helping the government to disseminate messages. If that we already detect something's wrong, like there are some negative reactions from the public, then this is, we are, I think Chiara's article mentioned like we are like the social conscious, like PR people serve as this kind of role. So we need to quickly respond to the management, and then conveying this kind of anxiety or like the negative reactions to the government, and then advise them to maybe check the program, check this scheme, maybe something, the program design was wrong, instead of, just following what the government said that, oh, there's nothing wrong, everything, conforms the law requirement. This definitely will not ease or will not help ease the public's anxiety when they face this situation. And so later on in 2023, when Royal Commission released their investigation report, they also condemned this kind of scheme. They think that it is very cruel because of the wrong calculation, and that caused a lot of anxiety. But this kind of situation from PR standpoint, maybe to some extent that can be prevented, because in the testing period, they can foresee something may be wrong, and it is us to tell the management that, okay, it is not perfect. There may be some defects that you need to fix before you really activate this to the public. So This is what I'm
Thank you.
thinking.
Yeah, thank you. I will continue with you one more question. So have you personally ever worked on a communication task that was legally approved, professionally expected, but still made you feel a bit uncomfortable?
I did not. I haven't had this experience, but I would observe like what is happening in the society now. Earlier we talked about like there is this right now this is low trust and very polarized society. And so when I am, and then also here in Australia, I don't know if I can mention this. We just yesterday or the other day, there was a big protest because of the president from Israel is visiting. And the government, of course, they will do whatever they think. They understand this kind of social, this kind of social device in the society, this kind of polarization. But they also need to think about culturally, even though by law everything probably is there is no problem, but culturally or from some religion standpoint, there can be some issues that they really need to take into consideration instead of just said, okay, by law, this is what we need to do. This also reflects that I don't know if you guys know that in several WTO ministerial conference, there are usually a lot of protest, and usually those law enforcement, they always say, okay, by law, if you violate, if you become violent, then I need to make the arrestment. But the thing is that, okay, that is from the law enforcement standpoint. But for us, communication, we need to understand that why, what is the reason that they come, and then how do we help them to convey the voice? What are their demands? And then, how can we do to make, to at least to meet some in the middle way to at least bring some social cohesion. This is what I'm thinking.
Very good. Thank you, Flora. And let's move over to you, Marlene. So I put two questions together. So you have recently been conducting research on ethics and compliance trainings in the US communication firms. So first of all, what were the key insights and why do you think ethics training is essential in today's world? Over to you.
Okay, thank you. So I would say that what I found is there was a lot of use of online training modules. This was specifically in an agency or firm setting. And so they are offering training. It typically is something that they do annually. It's computer based, and they actually do assess that people are completing the training. But it tends to be just those computer modules where you have these multiple test quizzes, but you're not seeing a lot of in-person training, the role playing that I mentioned earlier with the giving voice to values approach to ethics. And so people actually are good about ethical awareness and knowing being able to identify ethical issues, but the hope is then that they would then refer those to a more senior leader to figure out how to address. So there's not a lot of building ethical skills and competencies about how to actually act on an ethical issue. It's more about being aware and then raising it to a supervisor. There are sometimes, there were a couple of organizations that did offer training where they actually did some live training and worked through scenarios together, but that was rare. I only found a couple of organizations where that was occurring. And there was one organization, unfortunately, that their ethics training was simply signing and checking the box that you would see in their policy, and something that would take less than 15 minutes, maybe 5 minutes to accomplish. And they consider that to be ethics training. So that was quite troubling.
Thank you. Let's move over to Chiara. So regarding the ethical onion, how should communication professionals balance the legal compliance, organizational ethics, and personal morality if these layers are pointing to different directions?
And that's a good question. And I think this is actually more the case in many situations that you are facing, which road. And is I think what Marlene said also about why they are not following, despite knowing, be aware of the principle. Why are they not behaving as they're supposed to be? Because obviously they are fearing consequences. And I think this started exactly from inside the organization to allow for these mistakes, to allow the people to offer dissent and question, and the leader himself, they will need to bring it to the example what it means that how themselves, these personal experiences, how themselves handle this difficult situation. Now legality obviously is a major thing, so that we need to comply, and that it is, but that many times that also these laws have some rooms for maneuvering, or let's say adapting, or find some way to go around, as we have seen this many times. I think what it comes to handling that is that go back to your core value, go back to who you are as an organization, as a professional, and think about how you understand that, because that will be a good compass to say, okay, I'll do this. This is illegal, but it's not sufficient for us because we have these values, these points. We need to go in this direction. That's how I would address. And for global organization, I would say go with the stricter rules, because the by default the global watch around organization what they're doing. So even if you do something totally legal, totally acceptable from an ethical point of view in a region, but from a moral point of view is not acceptable from some groups, these groups will become really, really vocal, and they will raise awareness globally. So I think you have to balance that, and you have to give opportunity, of course, organization also in this situation where there is no real direction to experiment. And when they do wrong course of action, unless of course there are victims or anyone harmed, but when there are wrong course of action, admit the mistakes and try to direct in the right directions. I think that would maybe speak also a bit to what Flora said. Where is the human side and in this discussion? So that would be my, in a brief way of approaching this dilemma.
Thank you. There's one more question from our audience today, and just who picks up this first. So how might the management tool PESTEL assist in organizational ethics discussions? Who wants to take this?
I would use it for scanning, for environmental, and on each of the different pillars, I would look really closely, adding a couple of questions. How does that look from an ethical point of view, the cultural aspect, and so forth? So whatever is the focus there. So using as a radar for knowing what are the major trends and what are the major sentiments, how people feel about different issues and so forth across those. So yeah, for monitoring and making sense of what's happening around the organizational environment.
Thank you. It's time to wrap up our webinar here today. So a huge thanks to you, all of you joining us today, and a big hand to our great speakers of today. And just a reminder, let's continue being the stewards of trust, as I call us in this communication profession. Our abilities and capabilities are very much needed going forward. Please join our next webinar on the 24th of February, and that is focused on the traits required for future leaders, where moral is one key aspect pointed out. Empathy is another one, even storytelling skills. So in this rapidly advancing technological world, it feels like these human values will be highlighted and required. So welcome to join us on 24th, and thank you for today.